All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar. I'm going to give it just like 30 seconds for folks to join. I know kind of everyone's probably hopping from different meetings or classes or what have you. So while we join, maybe we can drop in the chat where we're joining from. I'm in Houston, Texas, and the weather is lovely today. It's a high of 77, so real autumnal weather for for us Texans here. Florida, love it. Tucson, oh, love Arizona. I spent my summers in Arizona growing up. DC and Toronto, Conway, Arkansas.
Nice.
I spent also many summers going to El Dorado, Arkansas. Seattle, love to see it. Okay. So I think we have quite a few people who've joined. We're also streaming live on LinkedIn today. I'm going to go ahead and get things started. So again, welcome everyone to What the C-Suite Wants Now, Career Resilience in the Age of AI. I'm Symphony Swift, Associate Director of Experiential Marketing here at Macmillan Learning. And like I said, I'll be kicking off our webinar. Um, Thank you for spending this hour with us to talk about something that I think is on everyone's minds, which is how to kind of to stand out and stay relevant and lead when the world of work is being rewritten very actively before our eyes with this big shift to AI. Today's conversation is really going to go beyond just AI literacy, and we're going to talk about what truly defines high potential talent, the people who don't just adapt to change, but who can lead through it. And we've got a really incredible lineup of leaders here today to discuss how organizations are redefining what leadership potential means in this new reality. How we're going to spend the next hour. So, we're going to kick it off with a panel discussion that will be led with Kristen Fox, CEO of Business Higher Education Forum. And our panelists are going to explore questions like, what skills and attributes define resilient, future-ready leaders, and how are organizations balancing technical ability with human leadership qualities like courage, empathy, and foresight. And then we'll have some time at the end of the webinar to do an audience Q&A. So keep your questions coming throughout the discussion. We might ask some in the moment, and then we'll get to questions that we don't ask in the moment towards the end of the webinar. This webinar is being recorded, so you will receive a link to the recording after the fact. And then we will share any resources following the webinar. So. With that, I'm going to introduce our guests today. We have a really special lineup. There are three powerhouse leaders bringing distinct but deeply complementary perspectives. First up, we have Kristen Fox, who is, like I said, the CEO of the Business Higher Education Forum, where she leads national efforts to bridge education and industry. She's actively reimagining how we prepare future leaders to meet fast changing workforce needs. And like I said, she will be moderating today's panel discussion. So I'm very excited to have Kristen with us. We are also going to get to hear from Torian Richardson, who's the founder and CEO of DBR77 and a former global director of inclusive recruiting for NVIDIA and a Harvard business alum. Torian has scaled global operations across finance, technology, and education while applying human-centered AI to build really resilient, future-ready systems, always with an emphasis and an eye towards empathy and ethics. And last but certainly not least, we will get to hear from Susan Winslow, CEO of Macmillan Learning. Susan has over 30 years of experience transforming education through digital innovation and data-driven strategy. She's here to share how leaders can align technology adoption, like the adoption of AI, with equity, organizational culture, and student success. So please join me in giving them a very warm virtual welcome. And with that, oh, go ahead, Torian. Were you going to say something?
Oh no, I was just cheering, just saying yay in
Yes,
my head.
welcoming your co-presenters today. With that, I'm going to hand it over to Kristen to get us started.
Sure. Well, thanks so much. It's great to be here with this great team and group and to talk about a topic that I spend a lot of time working with, thinking about, and sense making with the corporate partners and education partners that I have the opportunity to work with. And I think the bottom line, and where I'll start, is by saying, we're all figuring this out a little bit in real time, which makes conversations like this and conversations that bridge higher education and the workforce so incredibly important now and on an ongoing basis. So pleased to have the opportunity to kick us off and facilitate this dialogue. I thought it might be helpful to just frame a couple or several statistics as we start our conversation and the extent to which AI is transforming our workforce, how we work, and how we learn with really sweeping changes that I know you are all experiencing in different ways. At the same time, right, we can't fully predict those. And so in this conversation, it's really a part of that. Um, we also, even amidst that unpredictability, this is a moment that I believe demands us to also be working quickly and thoughtfully to make sure that we are prioritizing upskilling, reskilling, and curriculum agility so that we really are able to be as responsive as possible, right, to the changing roles and skills of the future. And what do we mean when we say, right, roles are changing? Well, what you can see here is just a little bit of what that velocity of change looks like. So this first statistic is from LinkedIn, and a look and prediction based on jobs and skills analysis that 70% of the skills that are part of most jobs will change in some way, and AI is making that more quickly than it's looked historically. What we also see, and this is from the World Economic Forum Future of Jobs report, that employers expect that about 60% of their workforce will need upskilling and reskilling by 2030. That might actually be low of an estimate, right? But still, that's the majority of the workforce. What we're also seeing too, and for those of you who teach at the undergraduate level, and in particular, I'm sure that's something that you're thinking about, but at the graduate level as well, entry level roles are shifting. We're seeing that they're hiring not just for bachelor's degree, right, or graduate degree early career candidates, but across the board, actually even more so for those that have less higher education, but are seeing higher levels of unemployment. But we're still, kind of seeing how that shakes out. But what we know is happening is that we're seeing AI start to reshape the pathways by which workers enter the workforce and build their expertise. Not only, and we can't tell yet, again, which jobs quite are being eliminated, which, how they're being augmented and how all those skills are changing, but we are seeing that some learning curves are shifting. So for example, there are some fields where AI is making it shorter the time it takes to gain mastery and to be able to enter into a field, which in some ways creates more opportunity. So those are things like network administrators, loan interviewers, roles where the tasks are pretty routine and there's not a lot of shift in how you do those things as you move up. So in those roles, right, you can start almost at a leg up. In other roles, though, we're seeing that AI is automating some of the early apprenticeship types of tasks that traditionally prepared people in those entry-level roles for senior roles. So for those of you in business school settings, right, think professional services, consulting, finance, many of those roles. And so what we're seeing there, legal associates as well, right, another one. Knowledge is more nuanced and tends to be based on experience. And so in those roles, we may start to see that it limits career entry points, right? The creation of slide decks, taking notes on calls and entry-level analysts. So those are some of the things that I think are really important to just know that we have kind of shaping the workforce, how skills are evolving, and how we need to then be thinking about how do we, as leaders across the education community, make sure that we are working closely and in hand, right, with understanding what the business sector needs for the future of work and talent. So I'm honored to have this conversation with these two incredibly thoughtful business leaders here today regarding both how you are leading your own teams in this moment and thinking about skills, as well as your working with your many partners and having a broader view across the field as well. So with that, um, one of the things that we were looking at, and many of you are likely familiar with, given the kind of business school focus, and many of the folks who are from business school settings on this in this call, is the AACSB State of Business Education Report. And so one of the things that you see here is that the top skills today, right, that are on the left, and the top skills for the future do have some adjustment, right, and things that are changing. So today, right, analytical thinking, resilience, flexibility and agility, leadership and social influence, and creative thinking are topping the list. By 2030, those same skills are still there, but there's also an anticipation that AI, data literacy, cyber, and environmental stewardship, right, also are in that top 10. So I'm curious, Susan and Torian, as you look at this list and as you think about the key skills that really matter most and are most important in your workforce today, especially as you think about future leaders who are developing in the workforce,
Mhm.
what do you see as most important in the workforce that you are building for tomorrow?
I will talk, I guess I'll go first.
Yeah.
I think,
Yeah.
I mean, I agree with all of these lists, and to a certain extent, to me, the sort of evolution of what comes in the top in the future is sort of with the assumption that we have accepted as baseline a lot of the top skills as today. And then, that the kind of applications of that as the technologies continue to advance makes sense to me. I think one of the really, really top skills that, of course, I'm going to be a little bit biased here, but that I see is, the ability to learn is really, really going to be important. And so all of these sort of reflect that curiosity, creative thinking, analytical thinking, but even just being aware, sort of the metacognitive understanding, this is how I learn and how I'm going to manage myself trying to tackle the acquisition of something new all the time. When do you need to rest? How does the brain work? Um, that I might add to this list.
Well,
Sorry.
What do
and
you think, Torian?
no, I think that's a really good way to look at it, Susan. And when I look at the list, particularly to the right, I kind of see it as, one being more skills based and things that you can actually learn or things that could be taught. And then part of that, right, which would be the creative thinking, maybe even the analytical thinking, but certainly the resilience, flexibility, agility. These would be geared more toward attributes. And I think looking at them separately is really important, especially right now, because a lot of the skills, that we're talking about now, and we'll be talking about in this conversation, some of them will be augmented in some way, and a lot of them will certainly be at least assisted in some way. So, my mindset is really around, and when we're looking at leaders and talking with leaders, how do we try to skate to the puck? And that's essentially the cardinal direction that we're going, where the social studies kids, right, including myself, I loved history, geography, and social studies in high school. Although I'm formally trained in finance and have worked in finance, those are the things that I really loved. And I think a lot of those human attributes are going to be what's at a premium. And I think we see some of that embedded over to the right here.
Agree.
Um, you just mentioned the difference between attributes and skills, Torian.
Mhm.
And I want to hear a little bit more about what you like, how you think about and define the difference there. And then
Mhm.
also, how what does that mean for how we then develop those different skills versus attributes? Or, do you think of those, there are different approaches that we need to be thinking about there, right? Which
Yeah.
can be trained or educated, right? What others need to be cultivated. I'm curious as to your thoughts there, Torian.
Well, I think there's one thing that we're all kind of acknowledging right now, which is there's fundamental change that's happening right now across the powered world, and that's really big, and that's why things feel so much ambiguity, I think, would be the overarching tone that we can talk about. And there are two things that are happening simultaneously, where from a software or a data aggregation standpoint, you know, the access to knowledge, or at least generally accepted knowledge, is real time, right? And then the second, and as we kind of get robotics, and then this kind of is going to lead to me answering this question, as robotics starts to accelerate and we get the hardware piece with the dexterity, then that is where we will see those two things really come together, right? And a lot of those skills and things that are done from a human standpoint will be able to be done from a robotic standpoint. Now, we don't know how long that's coming, but the reason I kind of use that as a precursor is because when I look at the difference between skills and attributes, the attributes are things that can't necessarily be taught. A skill is something that can be learned, right? An attribute is more cultivated, usually grows in an environment, at least in the way I like to frame it. And so I do believe that from an executive standpoint, well, I would say just from a human standpoint, what will be at a premium will be human connection. It will be the ability to communicate clearly in an analog and in a digital world, to collaborate, to be creative, to be coachable, and I think also to be, it doesn't start with a C, but it sounds the same, to be kinetic, right? And to be able to move with a certain level of agility, or as Susan articulated, to learn, right? In this constant state of information that is that's being inputted, how do we actually adapt to that environment at the speed in which the technology is actually moving? So those are the two things that I see. And I think if we use this question as a real example, right, the attribute that someone would have would be to be agile, right, to be have patience in a situation like this where we're working through ambiguity kind of as a society. So I think that these will be at a premium going forward as we move into the future.
That's great. That's really helpful. And in the chat, there is one question around when you talk about attributes, are you also talking about things like leadership and influence and some of those kinds of things?
Absolutely. I think I think the first thing is I think there's going to be a rooted feeling of agency, maybe entrepreneurship. I've heard it articulated that way, but agency is going to be really important. And that's really, as humans, how as this technology is advancing, how do we know and really understand ourselves and how we're showing up? Right? I think we're going to have an opportunity to do that more. And then the other part of that would be then how do we show up in the world and with others utilizing these tools? And that's where I think the curiosity, the communication, the kind of those 5 to 6 areas that are baseline and they're really cross-functional that can be utilized in many different industries, but are generalist tools that will be very important.
Yeah. And I would just say too, I'm at an event in Atlanta right now where the CEO of Delta just talked about one of the things that's most important in their organization, right, is around patience and empathy and working with other humans, right? And a theme that comes out, all the themes that you're mentioning that we saw on that list, are consistently, right, what I hear from the corporate leaders that we work with in large and small businesses right across the country of ultimately in an environment where we're navigating, right, just a lot of transition and shifts, the ability to think creatively, critically, and not just follow instructions, right, becomes
Yes.
so important, and even more so. And we'll talk more about, right, this question of then, well, how does AI, right, influence that, and how do we think about that? Susan, so we're talking a lot about kind of essentially what I would describe as like the long-term durability of durable skills. Sorry to use the same word twice. But that's really what we're, that those persist, they're important. Uh, there also is that evidence though, especially so early in your career, that technical skills, right, are also really valued and can help you get that first job. And that durable skills are also important, but they're incredibly important in helping you really then get that next job and succeed at higher levels in your career. So I think there's a question here then in terms of, how should we be thinking about the fact that the shelf life of technical skills, right, in particular, is,
Yeah.
getting slower. And, and specifically as we've got advances in generative AI. And so, how should we be thinking about what technical literacies mean? And, is it about, how to use specific tools? Is about understanding the implications of those tools, or ultimately, right, in some ways about both. But how are you thinking about that in your role, and how are you seeing, your partners think about that, Susan?
I too have been on the conference circuit, and I heard it recently described, the time that we're at right now that I think is really helpful, which you hear this time be compared a lot to sort of the dawn of the internet as well, going much faster. But at the beginning we sort of, people were taking things like how to use the internet classes, right? Trying to figure out what this was, and get enough skills to actually ultimately use the tools that were available to them successfully. I feel in some respects that we're in the same place right now, which is sort of, we've been handed a lot of new power, and tools that can do things. But first and foremost, you've got to have kind of a curiosity and a practice. And we do that within our organization via training. I think campuses also have a lot of that going on. People are signing up for how to use AI tools. But at a certain point, we're going to have to move past just the mechanics of it. Neat, I can write an email, but actually, what are you doing with these tools to um, actually 10x your output, or really enhance your the intellectual capability in your job? And I think in that process it becomes much more about trying to keep up with the tool. Yes, you've got to use them every day and understand what they're capable of, because if you haven't used it this week, likely you don't know what it's capable of. But equally, like, do you know how to ask the right questions? Do you understand the implications of implementing or using a tool? Who benefits, who doesn't, who's being left behind, and really coming up with what I look for is kind of that sound sense of sort of judgment and integrity developing using them, right? So, um, you know, sort of AI technical literacy is one thing, but I think before a lot longer, we will just assume that that's there the way we sort of assume people know how to use the internet. And then it'll be like, who's using it most effectively to get the outcomes they want.
And there's some great chatter in the chat around how folks are thinking about this as well. And so take a look at those, Susan and Torian as well. It's both some good observations and some questions.
Absolutely.
Um, the one, and I'll share, maybe we might put in the link to the AI professional framework. One of the things that our organization has developed that is publicly available, and you can see it on our website, is working with industry leaders, an employer validated or an industry validated view of what are the competencies that professionals need in the workforce to be an AI-enabled professional. So working with hundreds of employers, as well as higher education, leaders and experts. This is designed to be industry agnostic, and to enable educators and companies, so companies and colleges, to really have a common language around what it means to be AI ready in the workforce. And you can see that, but the thing that I would say is there's 7 elements to it. And similar with what you're describing, Susan, and what you've described, Torian, really two of them are about data, maybe three, right? Two elements are about AI literacy and data literacy, which are very important, right? Whether you're a marketing manager or a claims adjuster or an entry level technician on a manufacturing floor or a CEO. But then the other things, right? And we heard this again and again from business leaders was it's about adaptability and continuous learning. And really thinking critically about the output of a tool and how to use and solve problems in different ways and not just use the same, approach that you always have. How to collaborate and communicate, right? Using AI tools in the context of working with AI. Ethics, governance, responsible use, bias, as well as critical thinking, problem solving, and creativity. So really all areas that you've talked about, but that's a tool that may be helpful for many of you to take a look at and use in some of your own curriculum planning. And Susan, go
I
ahead.
will plug that tool. I think it
Yeah.
is really great. And it's also interesting that in many cases, the development of kind of those skills or experience is better together. Like I do, it's a really good example of how we're saying, what it takes to be a successful human in the future is really kind of doubling down on our human traits. And one of the things is that we do tend to learn better together when people are pushing us or questioning an idea, and you can figure out how to do something in a better way. So I think that's another kind of stage setting for some of the stuff we've been talking about, that collaboration in many ways
Yeah.
is a great path to.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think to kind of piggyback what you said before and what you're articulating now, Susan, is I look at it not from a literacy standpoint. I look at it more from, is there a mindset or over mastery? Because I think we're moving into a place where it's going to be more important the type of mindset that you're bringing as opposed to mastering one particular discipline.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that generalist view, I think, is the ability to go, collaboratively look at the big picture and then scroll down, I think is going to be what we're seeing right now at a premium right now
Yeah.
from an employment standpoint.
100% agree with that. Like, yeah, it's the specialization and sort of silos is not going to work in this new sort of era. Yeah.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit then about early career talent specifically. And if we think about, individuals who are, and not just coming out of an undergraduate experience, this could be out of an early career, right? Graduate experience, graduate degree or credential experience as well. But I shared a little bit at the outset, right? How we're seeing roles evolve. Is still in terms of net numbers and opportunities, right? Jury's still out on exactly what's AI, what's uncertainty in the economy, right, et cetera. But given what we're seeing in terms of, right, some higher expectations of more context and people kind of starting their careers in the middle, right? Not at the entry level rung, different mentorship models. What does that mean, right, for how business schools and education more broadly needs to be thinking about preparing students differently for first jobs, and also how employers need to be able to work differently to ensure, that we're both thinking about long-term, right, skill and talent needs as well as medium and long-term, talent needs. And maybe it's Torian is someone who's played a recruitment and talent leadership role and different businesses. Maybe that's a good one for you to start with.
Yeah, for sure. I think that one thing, and it goes back to the mindset standpoint, the way that I like to articulate it is the agency piece, because I think that as a new graduate, you're moving into a economic environment that really no one has the answer for what things look like around the corner. But candidly, I also think this is an amazing opportunity right now. This is a once in a lifetime moment that we're at the beginning of. And while there is a lot of uncertainty, there is tons of opportunity that's there. So what I would say is, a technical mindset for sure is important, but then also having an entrepreneurial mindset, thinking of yourself and how you're showing up from not a branding standpoint, but as a brand, and being able to highlight yourself and combine the things that are important to you as well as parts of your social aspect with your professional aspirations, I think is really important, because I do think that at this point, from a transition standpoint, that mindset, whether it's within an organization or whether you start your own, the mindset is typically the same. And that's around, agency, being a self-starter. Again, we go back to those attributes of being able to collaborate, to be able to communicate analog, person to person, but as well as digitally in a consistent way, right? These are the areas that will be the skill sets, if you will, for the sake of our conversation, transferable across the different industries.
Yeah, I also I think the way we develop that in the future, because it really is, I love the word agency that you're using. It really is going to become, how understanding yourself and then how that relates to, the problem or the experience at hand or the outcome you're trying to achieve. And I think, if we think of how do you prepare people, via business schools, degrees, or other preparation, learning to get that sense of confidence is really, really important. And a lot of that, you hear a lot of the chatter sort of changing. And how do we get real work problems or real experiences built into the kind of that early stage, so that when learners graduate, they're sort of not only ready to enter the workforce, but also can choose or show, I should say, that they've got the ability to be a highly productive worker, not just coming in, with the decline in entry level positions. You sort of end up having to show that you have high output right at the beginning. And I think there's a lot that schools and curricula can do to foster that. A lot of which is actually, the focus of your business, Kristen. So I'll turn this over to you in a little bit, but really fostering real life work, real
Yeah,
experiences
yeah,
where
yeah.
people get that sense of, I can do this, and I actually know what I'm going to contribute on a team that is, charged with doing some sort of
100%.
Yeah.
100%, Susan. I agree with you. And I'll just use DPR 77 as an example. So one of the things that we're looking to do and are doing in the future is partnering with universities, community colleges, specifically in the Charlotte area where we're building things out. And a lot of it has to do with, one, we have a digital twin lab where students can actually go, and if it comes from an advanced manufacturing and logistics standpoint, do and utilize the same type of applications that are being used in industry while they're at the university, as well as be able to go in and have different types of internships and real world experiences coming in directly from credentialing or two-year programs. So, I do think that we will see this convergence of incubators of industry that is adjacent to higher education. And there's a lot more of embedding of how we operate and how we kind of nurture students, if you will. I think we'll see a lot more of that going forward.
I think what you're describing too are a couple of, or like a spectrum, right, of different ways to be thinking about what I hear clearly from both of you that I agree with, is it is about applied contextual experiential learning, right? And there's a good comment in the chat too about that's situated to right where the student is developmentally, right? In that discovery, self-reflection journey. And also, one of the things that I also think about there is how do you make it as easy as possible to get as many employers meaningfully engaged, right, in those authentic experiences, right, that have real consequences, real feedback, where you're developing real relationships and social networks, and really then having reflection, understanding, and mentorship to some degree around what skills you've developed, and then are able to present those, right, as a compel, not only here's what I said I could do, but here's someone else who saw me do that who will vouch for the fact that I did it in a professional context.
And it'll probably be on a blockchain.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so I think that's really, that's really important.
I
And
love the comment, by the way, in the chat, say,
Mhm.
diminishing imposter syndrome in students through early experiences. Like, who
Yeah.
who wouldn't be better off with a little reduction in their imposter syndrome early on?
Well, and I do think this is where, right, if you think back to your own to formative experiences, in your own career or professional journey, yes, it was about the skills, and the competencies you required, but it was also about, being encouraged, believed in, seen, heard, and someone seeing something in you that you hadn't seen yourself, So those two things combined, I think, are obviously incredibly important, especially in an AI augmented world. So
Four
we've
extremely powerful words. Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you
yeah,
off. I
no,
was
go
going to say
ahead.
four
Please go ahead,
extremely
Frank.
powerful words are I believe in you. Those four
Mm,
words. I believe in you.
right.
Um, so let's talk about, so you both have talked about, so we were talking about early career, and now if we look both at early career but throughout the lifespan, there's a one of the things that I hear from leading employers a little bit is, hey, if you're waiting for us to tell you what are all the skills are that we're going to need as they're evolving so rapidly, stop waiting, because we don't know them all either, right? This is like sophisticated, thoughtful CHROs at large companies, right? So given that, we hear again that, it's resilience, it's problem solving, it's the ability to make decisions in an uncertain environment. Okay, right? Like, yes, we hear that again. How though then do we, whether we're in a business school setting, or an undergraduate setting, or in a professional setting, what are some of the ways that you identify and develop talent to be able to do that when there really isn't there isn't a playbook? And how can we better prepare students for that reality as well, right? Is there anything else that we haven't talked about that the education sector can be doing around that?
That is a great question and it's one I get a lot. But it is, I think it comes back to, one, establishing sort of a clear expectation of what work looks like now and what it might look like in the future, even if it's vague and not specific, but that um, productivity is expected, and you can already see it in many of our jobs to go up, and that people who are open to sort of trying things are often rewarded. And so being confident enough to say, why not? Why don't I try this, doing it a different way and see what happens? And I think leaders, it's really difficult because there's so much uncertainty, and people, spend a lot of time with a high anxiety about what the future holds. But trying to create a space that it's okay to do that, to push the boundaries and ask to do something that you've never done before. And if it fails, that's fine. Let's learn from it. Again, really focus on the learning and being a very rapid learner. And it's fine to try things, and then support it when it doesn't work and allow people to move on. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, I'm trying. I'm sorry, any other things. I've got a few
Yeah.
in my head, but
Well, I think about it just in one word, really. It's embodiment. I think that from a leadership standpoint, regardless of, leadership from action, not necessarily from a position standpoint, now is the time to try new things, to be compassionate, to say, hey, I don't know. We're going to iterate. We have to embody it from a leadership standpoint, the things that we look for. So when I'm evaluating a candidate or looking at potential partners or even some of the boards that I've been on from a search standpoint, it's not like mindset. You're looking more for alignment around from an attribute standpoint, right? And then being a candidate or someone being able to substantiate that, being able to speak to a situation where they were, and, I'm thinking from an interview standpoint, but details around that, but really being able to talk about, Susan, as you talked about this, the ecosystem that you were a part of, how did you contribute? What were the things that you would change if you could go back? And then kind of circling back from the learnings and how those learnings have been applied. From an analog standpoint, this is one of the ways that we try to do things. I think going forward with AI and the ability to hyper connect all of our personal APIs into these different platforms, I think how we're looking at talent or how we're evaluating talent will certainly be changing, and it will have some trade-offs as well, right? Because all of these systems that we're speaking to are actually built by humans, so they have human bias
right.
embedded in them all the way through.
And that's, really being able to question, because I think that's it's very easy to get some tools to do what you want and make it look good and not think, what are the consequences of this? You know,
Mm.
what am I doing? What is the data that I got? How do I question? You know, is there another place I should be searching? Is there another parameter that wouldn't have been obvious to these tools to begin with?
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
What
really core.
one someone put in the chat a question. Uh Imagine you run your own company. So you don't have to imagine that because you actually do. Would you prefer to hire someone with, they say traditional educational background, but I'm gonna interpret actually the meaning here based on the second part of the definition to be like holistic educational background who has knowledge of AI, or someone who who doesn't have deep expertise in any one field, but can use AI tools to find information quickly, even if they don't have that full holistic understanding of what information means or implies in context. I think it's,
Well, I'll answer that with my own bias because I consider myself a generalist. I've worked in a lot of different industries
yeah.
and have had a lot of different positions. I would say the latter. Not that anyone would be wrong or right. Again, it kind of goes back to the conversation we were having around that ability to kind of really jump in, learn, collaborate, communicate, and pivot or be agile or be kinetic is the way we articulate it
Mhm.
when you need to be to kind of move to different things. And this is what Susan is describing essentially,
Yeah.
which is that continuous learning loop that we will be in, at least until things are implanted into our
Yeah,
brains.
well, and to that end, I'm like, unfair question because I think you can be very good at learning tools as they stand today, but
Mm.
the tools, what's available changes so fast. You know, things that we didn't think possible are suddenly, you know, then 1 week they're possible. They're not, you know, just possible, they're excellent. And so one of the things that I think an education generic education could give you, and maybe, you know, debatable how much it happens all the time, but is that ability to learn how to learn.
Mhm.
That is the practice, the mindset that you're practicing in those environments. And I think as long as that is true, um, you know, you need both because
Mhm.
you've got to, everything's going to change again one more time, and you need to understand how to digest that and bring it into your own
Mhm.
thinking.
Yes. Absolutely.
Uh,
Technology is evolving faster than our trust for it. That's for
That's
sure.
for sure.
mhm. So given that, actually, I think that's where there's like this really interesting place where we have to like hold two thoughts in our head at the same time. And for those, especially, right, faculty who are on the front lines of like of designing assessments, right, and that it's particularly challenging to hold these two thoughts in your head at the same time, and implement against them, right, which is, you know, we've been talking about, you know, we saw at the outset that chart around AI skills starting to be at the top. I shared the framework, you know, that we built in conjunction with employers around AI skills. But there's also evidence that professionals who have, whether they're early or later career, right, in any role, this is like in a writing role, in a you know healthcare role, in a leadership role, right, or a business setting, if you have AI skills. By looking at job postings, we can see that those command a wage premium across a general set of roles up to 26%. If you look at those in like IT and technical roles, it's actually even higher percentage. Leading CEOs have also said, right, if you know how to use AI to help you do your job, you're more likely to have a job over time as we project into the future. Like those become, you know, key fluencies. At the same time, we know that there's concern about when, how, and what context, right, AI is used in the educational process. We're talking about, right, making sure people are curious, reflective, creative, and there's, you know, some evidence that overusage of generative AI tools, you know, can inhibit some of those skills. You can hear that referred to as cognitive offloading.
Mm.
And so you know, and this is a hard question that I don't think anyone fully has the answer to. So I will acknowledge that as I throw a nice softball at you. But you know, how do you think about that in your workplaces? You know, how at a high level should business school leaders be thinking about this to ensure that, you know, we are accomplishing both of those things, right? We have an AI fluent workforce and this reflective and creative workforce that we need. And the last thing I'll throw into the mix that one of my an individual from a high tech firm, a global tech firm partner said is, so there's also some evidence that when institutions full out ban the use of generative AI, that it tends to be women and students of color who listen more to that, and men who don't and go and use it anyway. And so, you know, if we don't, you know, equip everyone with some of those skills at the right time in the educational process, right, we further exacerbate what we already see in terms of, right, wage differentials, et cetera, in the workforce. So big gnarly challenge. We won't tackle that fully in this question, but really curious, you know, how we should be thinking about that, and any, you know, any guidance or reflection that you both have there.
Yeah, I think from an industry standpoint, I think we're at a pivotal point, and I think from institutions, it's going to be really important to partner with and or be moving with the speed of change. I agree with Susan and what she's heard around, you know, this is like the internet. I would say even more, just from a little bit more that I may know than others, but not that much. But things are happening exponentially fast, and we don't have any indicators that this will be slowing down anytime soon. So I think that being able to say, you know, how can we reimagine maybe curriculums? How do we start to look at things more aligned to, or continue to be aligned to, the things that we're talking about here? I think that opens up the door to have an opportunity to really create an environment for students to leave institutions and then matriculate into, or either create their own institutions as well. I think we'll see a lot more entrepreneurship in moving into the environment that we're moving into right now.
Yeah, and I think I completely agree. I think given that there's going to be an expectation of competency one way or another when students join the workforce, um, it's important, I think, to have the conversation of when and why, right? And that's back to like what it means to be a good learner. If you're not using AI as sort of the partner or something to help amplify what you're doing and be better, um, again, whatever your output is, then, but instead just copying and pasting and getting an answer or just cheating, or, you know, then I think your preparedness is going to be different. And we're not really good at saying that to people yet, but I can say as an employer, it is very obvious to me where people are when I talk to them in their sort of AI journey. And you really can pick up when someone knows how to use it to make themselves stronger, and really, like I said, amplify is the best word I can think of, really amplify their agency, do more, be more, versus a simple use case. And that is to me going to be the kind of growing gap between the haves and have nots. And I've seen similar data where when we question it or make it seem like something that we shouldn't be bringing, it is often, you know, exactly the groups of people that we really have been trying so hard to kind of bring up in society and really give more opportunity to. So I don't think that's a really fair solution either. We have to be, this is back to what I think keeps happening. Every time we find a good application, we have to constantly be thinking, okay, wait, who did that benefit and who did that harm? And you've just got to get used to that kind of thinking, because it's impossible to think, you know, there's so many unintended consequences of everything we do now.
So I want to make sure that if there are questions coming from the audience, that we leave time for those. So I'm going to pause and ask the team if there's any.
There's one that I see now, and I just reminded everyone that you can ask questions in the chat. There's also the Q&A function here in Zoom, so we're keeping an eye on both. But while we wait for more people to chime in with questions, there was one around what are the trade-offs of using AI in education, particularly in times of crisis when AI isn't available. And I think the question I'm going to infer here that the question might be asking like, what happens when learners end up a little over reliant on these tools and they might not be available to them?
Right.
Well,
So,
I think
yeah, go Torian. You go
yeah,
first.
well, I think one is, this is going to be a transitionary period, right? So, I know that as we're implementing this new tool, because like any other new tool, it's going to take some time, one, for the facilitator of the tool to learn it, learn the best way to use it, and then the best way to deploy it in a classroom. And then, as Susan said, there will be some iteration that goes along there. So that embodiment piece is very important for us as leaders. I think that it will be working through a lot of the use of these tools and what they look like because, everything that's being sold isn't necessarily um, true and or what's going to happen. This is where I kind of go back to agency. Like we have agency in what's happening right now. At least this is certainly my stance and how we show up, the things that we speak to, and then looking at some of the trade-offs. I think some of the things could be not only availability, but data, right? The data that's being used. But these are all conversations and things that we have to have while being in the process of flying this plane while we're changing the wings because it has taken off. And I think it's really getting to that point to say we have to be iterative and try things is probably the starting point that I would start with and that we started with a few years ago, actually.
And the only thing I would add to that is it, the intent of the question is, I would argue that there should be times where we are functioning without AI. I mean, that
Mm.
is part of learning how to use it is when it is part of your thought process, when it is making you better, and then taking time to pause and think about, well, how do I really feel about this? Or what would I think is the next step? So becoming very deliberate around when you are using it, to the best of your ability to enhance versus thinking again back to what is really your work, your creativity, your moment here, your thought pattern that you're bringing to it. So, and you don't really, the more you kind of try to do something without it, you begin to understand where those lines are. And I think that's a really good thing to learn.
Absolutely.
Um, I was meeting with a group of faculty and faculty leaders recently, and one of the things that they said they're using blue books more often for certain assignments, right? Where it
Hmm.
is really important to understand, right, and ensure that students are processing the information in a certain way, right? And they're as someone who, again, this is where we can hold two thoughts at the same time, right? That there's the real power of technology, right, and personalizing learning and delivering assessments, et cetera. But again, depending on right what what outcome you're trying to achieve, that in some cases may be the right approach. Um, Symphony, I think you were going to say something.
Oh no, no. I was just nodding and agreeing. Yes. We do have a couple more questions that have come in, and one from Jason who joined a little late, so unfortunately missed some of the earlier parts of the webinar, but asked specifically like for professors, for educators who have more limited knowledge of like the advancements in AI and the capabilities and limitations of AI. Um, how can they prepare to facilitate and to prepare their students for this transition? Like what can they do if they're already feeling like their knowledge of these tools is limited?
I'm going to go back to the word that I use and I try to model, which is embody. The best way to learn AI tools is to use them and allocate time to try to use them. And, I had to become a really good student again, and it was very frustrating because, basically starting off at about 2 years old, but just like anything else, as we learn and we find ways that it becomes more relatable to us, that learning curve kind of grows. So my answer to that question would be embodiment. I would allocate time to actually learn new tools and try to implement them as you learn them.
And be patient with yourself. Like I
Mhm.
agree. You've got to jump in and be patient with yourself in what you expect out of it in that partnership at first, but equally, use it to train you. What do you need? I'm teaching this course. Here's my syllabus. I want to layer in some experience for my students to work with AI. It's brilliant to think like that.
Yeah, yeah,
So it can
yeah.
help, suggest and then you can tweak it and keep saying, no, this is not how I teach, but use it to help you figure out how to accomplish your goals with your students. And I think you'll be pleasantly surprised.
And there's some really good examples and ideas in the chat too that folks are sharing. Some in the form of questions around certain ideas, others in the form of just sharing an idea that I think are really good. Um,
Yeah, I love this. Tammy saying I aim to create curriculum that mimics the business world so that students gain those critical skills that were mentioned earlier. And Tammy specifically asking, like, is there an assignment or activity that we could recommend that that they might be able to incorporate into their own course? And I don't know that we have anything off the top of our heads, but now I'm brainstorming on the
Mhm,
side and I'm like, could
mhm.
we have like another webinar where we bring people together from different
yeah.
industries and say like, okay, these are the cases, these are the things
Right.
that are happening in my industry, the
Yeah.
things that I need my employees to work on, and these could be inspiration for things you could do in your own courses.
And
And someone just put
we're happy to
it.
share, I think, our own evolution with anyone who wants to sit and listen to it, where, we've been thinking again as a learning company about how to approach this and sort of lessons learned, what's worked and how you get to more personalized options with your students. Kristen, sorry.
I was just gonna say, I in the webinar chat, I didn't realize that some of the comments I thought everyone could see, only the host and panelists can see. But I just wanted to then share, since I had said, oh, there's some really good ideas in here. Someone shared that they're building out a program focused on collaborative intelligence. And so should we be thinking
Mm,
about courses or competencies embedded in that, and curiosity, which I think is a great idea, right? How you would do that and what that would look like, TBD. And then, some to your point, Symphony, around, what I see here in these questions is some real thirst for let's co-create together. I think you're correct, Susan, that AI actually can be a good companion, right, for ideas and co-creating at a certain level. But a question around what assignments could I create that mimic the business world so that students gain those critical skills. Like I would suggest you use that as a prompt and start there. And then, right, it's fun to do it with other faculty in a working group and do it in that way. But that can be a good way to get
Which
started.
perfectly mirrors most of the work going on in
Yeah,
businesses now, right? I mean,
exactly.
mhm.
start and then get together, hence all of our emphasis in this
Yeah.
conversation around learning to work together and really, learning how to amplify that connectivity, the human connectivity to a great
Yeah.
outcome. That's
Yeah, because it's interesting when we think about this. I mean, ultimately, it's a new tool, or it's a tool that's been around for a while, but it's kind of, commercializing, if you
exploded.
will, across the globe. Um, but at the end of the day, it's a human challenge around change.
Hmm.
It's around
Yes.
change. It's really what
Yeah.
it comes down to.
So if there are no other questions from the group, what I might ask Susan and Torian, you both to end on is your, short version of what do you see as being key characteristics of high potential talent in this age of AI? There's no guarantees, but what's the practical advice you would give, right, to someone who's looking to build a resilient career in this current reality? Anything you'd emphasize or say newly from this conversation?
Yeah, I'll go back to, that sense of agency. I think this is a once in a lifetime, once in a century, if you will, opportunity that all of us have. So it's a great time to be alive. I'll start very, very big picture. And there will be some challenges, a lot of them, but this is also an opportunity for us to step up. I actually believe in humans as we manage all of this, and I think we'll make our way through. But to be specific from a career resilience standpoint, just finding your own agency, I think, is really important, and that's around really detaching and positioning yourself, creating opportunities, right? Putting yourself in position where things are right now. And that's at the center of that is what Susan has mentioned, which is the learning aspect and that curiosity and being agile. So, you know, if I were to say three, it would be those three that I would really anchor on. Things are moving, they're moving fast. And, you know, this feels like an earthquake because it is. The fundamentals of the powered world is changing right now. That's really where we are. And I'd say that in a very optimistic way because this is an opportunity for leaders and everyone on this call to grow, and we'll grow together, and we'll figure it out. But from a resiliency standpoint, I think that's what we need to model for our students.
Yes, I mean, it's very hard to follow, but I would, yes, agree and double down on, you know, learn to enjoy learning, learn how to do it in a way that really suits you and you're effective at it and you understand yourself well enough to change. And also maybe don't be afraid to be an optimist. There's a lot of unknowns, but just if you come at it with how do we take all of this in, all of this change and all of this technology and make the world a better place, that ideas will come to you. And
Yes.
that's really, you know, how we get the world we want on the other side of this. So
Thank you for that optimistic note to end on.
I think we all are. So that was easy.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Optimism isn't always easy, but it is critical. I want to thank you all. I want to thank all the attendees for joining and taking this time out of your day and your busy schedules. And I also want to thank Susan, Torian, and Kristen for what others have remarked in the chat was a fantastic conversation. Definitely insightful, eye-opening, and something to continue to noodle on long after today. So thank you all. I know someone did ask. Yes, we will be sharing recording transcripts and resources after the webinar. So don't worry, you won't miss out on anything at all. Thank you. And I think with that, we can wrap up.
Thank you. Thank you all so much.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank you,
you.
Susan. Thank you, Kristen.